and Greg and Richard right here on Talking Red.
Hello and welcome to Talking Reds, a Nottingham Forest podcast. For the first time in more than 30 years, Nottingham Forest have qualified for European football. I'm your host, Greg Oram, along with my fellow Forest fanatic from across the Atlantic, ready for a European mystery tour. It's Richard Sprague. Richard Sprague in Oklahoma. Good evening. How are you, sir?
I'm doing all right. Yeah. Good. It was a good 4-hour window to just kind of like decompress a little bit because it's Mother's Day over here, right, Andrew? So we've got to focus on the moms, not focus on what we just witnessed, but focus on Europe because we do have that now. So, just try to find the joy today, even with some of the dark clouds that maybe followed over the City ground after the match.
They say that time is a great healer, and as Richard said, it's been about 4 hours or so since the full-time whistle at the City ground. And whilst I, for one, have regained a little bit of equilibrium, it does feel like we're going to need a bit longer to pull ourselves together properly after a hugely disappointing 2-2 draw against already relegated Leicester City. And that leaves, I guess, any hope of Champions League qualification definitely out of our hands and hanging by a thread. So it feels funny to feel deflated when, in fact, Forest have secured European football next term. That point makes it a guarantee. And if you'd offered me Conference League qualification back in August, well, I'd have bitten your balls off. Perspective and clear heads are needed. Not quite sure you'll get that here, but with Richard and I for the inquest, we welcome Andrew Cove.
Here's a little song I wrote. You might want to sing it note for note. Don't worry. Be happy. In every life we have some trouble, but when you worry you make it double. Don't worry. Be happy. Don't worry. Be happy now. Don't worry. Be happy.
I think it's important that we try and remain positive and optimistic because we're in the Premier League. We're not in a dogfight at the bottom like we've had to struggle with for the last couple of years or so. We are in the Premier League. So don't worry. Be happy. Andrew Cove, how are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm doing good. And I'm a glass half full guy. And we were just chatting before we went live. I think having that sense of perspective, of course it hurts at the moment. I think because our expectations have shifted, over the last few months with how well we've been performing and seeing those lofty heights of the Champions League as a possibility. Of course it's disappointing, it's raw, but I think when we take time to step back and look at the season as a whole, and you said, if you'd offered us top 7 in August, we'd have snapped your hand off. So yeah, I'm doing good. I'm still in a good place. It's just disappointing, not least the fact that it was against Leicester as well. I mean, that's what probably hurts the most.
Yeah, a certain contributor to this podcast remains nameless, but he had guaranteed us that Leicester was going to be 3 points for Forest, but it didn't happen, unfortunately. But, Richard, it's not over in terms of the Champions League. We can't finish lower than 7th, and that is such an amazing achievement for Nottingham Forest, okay? I've been a fan for a long time. I'm 50 years old, and I've been fortunate enough to grow up with Clough, to go to games in the old First Division, in the Premier League, and then the Championship yo-yo bit happened, and then we were down for a while. So I've, like many watchers and listeners, have been through it. And it's been a long time since we were back in the Premier League. The 2 years previous have been a real trial in many ways, not just on the pitch, but off as well. And this season has just been absolutely amazing. It's the first year of Talking Reds. We decided to come together and produce our own podcast, having been in the comments of Forest Focus and wanting so much to be able to have our say as well. And so the reason why this podcast exists is because we just are fans like everyone else. And if you've never heard of us before, it doesn't mean that we haven't been fans for a long, long time. So one or two people might think we're jumping on the bandwagon, and that has been banded around a little bit. But let me tell you now, that isn't the case. We've been around as Forest fans for a long, long time. And so to be back in the top 7 and back in Europe, Richard, it's an amazing thing, right?
Absolutely. Because even though there's been doubt throughout the process, mostly from, those talking heads that we know of, it's still, we feel more relevant than ever. And the fact that we went into this season with a prediction episode that we did with the idea that we were going to finish 12th and hearing, well, that's optimistic. I don't know if we can do that. Most folks were saying, somewhere between 14 to 17. If you're Carragher, you're saying we're getting relegated for sure. And to be where we are is remarkable. I know that's easy to give yourself that pep talk, right? When we've just seen what we've seen and we drew, and as you said, Greg, it's taken out of our hands. But no, you cannot diminish what this has meant for this club. And someone, I think it was Tricky Mickey, put in the comments, Marinakis did deliver. His promise was to get into European football, and he's got it. So this is great. It's an organic sort of step. I think you were bringing up Greg beforehand, and I think it was maybe Jamie Martin that said it on X that. That's what Villa did, right? They got to that Conference League space and then they built it up. And so there's nothing to suggest that we can't do the same thing. It'll be interesting to see how it all unfolds. But yeah, you can't remain anything but positive and be grateful. I mean, what a club we support. Gosh, I love watching this club play. It's what passion's about, right? It's equal parts infuriation and equal parts love and joy, right? So that's what we get with Forest. We've gotten every moment this season. So can't say anything different from what we just witnessed.
One or two in the comments already. Thank you very much for being with us. And so good evening to you all. If you're going to listen back to this on YouTube, of course, yes, but Apple and Spotify as well, then thank you for joining us on the playback. Jay was in early and he was asking, evening fellas, are we happy or disappointed? I think it's a mixture of both, Jay. I think that's what you're going to get. Very, very happy with Europe. Disappointed with a draw. I think that it's going to be really challenging for us to finish in the top 5 now. And so, we just have to kind of suck it up and look on the positives. Brucey over in Texas is taking it really hard. He hasn't pulled himself together. So he's going to keep the comments to the minimal. I don't think they necessarily have to do that. And Pat, he's disappointed that we've tailed off. Yeah, I am too, Pat, that we've tailed off a bit. I think that's squad depth and running on fumes, basically. Overall, Europe is a great achievement indeed. And David in DC says it's a tough one to take, but we've got to try and remain positive as much as we can. And there's still, Andrew, loads to be positive about, isn't there? There really, really is. Let's crack on with thoughts on the game. I mean, this always had, I suppose, the makings of it being the proverbial banana skin. It feels like a defeat, I guess, to a certain degree, but we didn't lose. We got the point that guaranteed us that European football. But what are your general thoughts on how the match unfolded, mate?
It's very typical of what Forest have been like the last few games. I think you can see that as a squad and as that core of that starting 11, 12, 13 players that we've seen, they're just spent. And I think you see that to be on for 90 minutes week in, week out. Earlier on in the season, I think they had the energy and they had the drive to be able to complete and compete 90 minutes against, these elite opposition. I think we're just seeing the net result of us having a shallow squad and the players just being physically and mentally gassed. I think that's what it comes down to. And I think today was a microcosm of that. You saw, if I recall, I think we came out of the blocks pretty good. And then obviously we conceded a sloppy goal. I think you could look at the defense in terms of following up on the shot. They were just quicker to that second ball than we were. Managed to pull ourselves back into it. And I thought for periods of the game, we looked okay. But again, symptomatic of the last few games that we've seen, we've had, reasonable amounts of possession in the final third, but we haven't created many clear chances. And when we haven't been taking them. And earlier on in the season, we were so clinical when we got those opportunities. You think back to the United game a few months ago, we had that one chance early on. I don't recall us having many other chances beyond the Elanga goal. We were just so clinical and we just seem to have lost that edge. And it probably is just down to fatigue. It's a long season, a shallow squad. And I think that's where we're at as a team now. We're kind of having to just, crawl across the line. And again, you saw that in the second half. I think that last goal at a point in the game where if you've got the energy physically and mentally to be chasing a game to get, the win, they just didn't have it. We didn't see that explosive levels of attack in the last 15, 20 minutes. I think substitutions may not have helped. The Taiwo situation, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit, also probably didn't help. But again, I think we've just run out of steam. And that's exactly what we saw again today.
Please do hit like and subscribe on this video. And you can catch us on TikTok, Facebook, X, and Instagram as well. You can follow us on all platforms. Please do that if you can. Liking and subscribing this video really helps as well. Thank you if you can. Richard, team news. Would Murillo play? Wouldn't he play? I was hearing that he was going to play, and one or two were hearing that he wasn't going to play. And you know, the leaks, someone's leak wasn't working properly, but it turns out that Murillo wasn't featured. And I think we all agreed in our WhatsApp group that okay, if he's not quite ready to play, let's not risk him, because we should have enough to beat Leicester. I mean, it's very easy for people to say, "Oh no, don't disrespect Leicester," but they've been shit all season. I'm sorry, they have been. And they're a team, they weren't even very good today until they went 2-1 down and we stopped playing, which we'll get to. But anyway, I digress. We had Morato in with Milenkovic. Did that really, did it come back to bite us? I think is what I'm trying to get at. I was thinking we should have enough with Morato and Milenkovic, but is Murillo just too much of a good player that you're going to miss him no matter who you play?
I think it was spoken of by David Prutton on the broadcast, and we've heard this, at least the broadcast we had. I think we've heard this throughout, is that the differential between the second level of our squad versus the starting 11 becomes really obvious. I think Morato's a decent footballer. I think he's good. I mean, he's a young player still. He's still developing. He's coming from a league that's not nearly as competitive as we know. But I would suggest that Murillo's, I think, underrated in terms of his athleticism, his ability to diagnose the situation. I mean, look at how many times he's saved us with balls off the line or that last-ditch tackle, right? I think of the Mikel Antonio tackle last season. It was just like the way that he can find the exact right second to step in. And I thought, you know, personally, when you're in a situation like, we'll just take the goal, for example, Buonanote's advancing and Morato just kept seemingly backing up. I'm like, when he gets into the box, you don't want to back up too. I mean, yes, you want to be careful because you don't want to give away a penalty. But in retrospect, I'm like, why are you backing up? Because he can just rifle the shot potentially right past Sells, because he's got all that space in front of him. I wonder if that's a kind of moment where Murillo, with a kind of like closing speed he has and the kind of the diagnostics that he's developed, even though there's still opportunity for him to get better. I wonder if those are the kinds of moments, given how much more he's played than Morato has, that he could probably make a difference in that scenario. I don't know if you know, buts and maybes, right? But it's just, it definitely seemed like there was even moments where the play just felt like it got really slowed. Because the good thing about Murillo, even though he can be a little bit, he can take risks, obviously, with the ball, a little bit more at his feet as well as passing, but there's also the brilliance that accompanies that too. And he gets into spaces and he creates opportunities through that passing that you just don't get with someone like Morato. And that's not something that you see with every center back either, but he's just such an incredible talent. And you're right. I think for me, that was a huge miss for us today. And I understand why Nuno did it. He's saving him for these last two matches that he probably deems more difficult. But at the same time, yeah, it would have been great to have him there, because I think there's certainly isolated events where he potentially could have stepped in and done something different than Morato.
Yeah, I mean, look, I know that we're on the second goal for Leicester now, which is fine. I mean, we don't have to do everything in order. There's no. I kind of felt like we probably would talk about it now, because having Murillo there, I think would have. That's the moment when I think we might have made a difference. Because I think if you're going to be a central defender and you're going to back off your man, and there was already a bit of a gap between him and the player, and when he backed off, he created an even wider gap. So Buonanote's coming into the box. It didn't really take that much to kind of like knock it to the right of Morato and take the shot. Whereas I felt that if Morato had pushed in and gone in tight and made it more difficult for him, and I think Murillo is the master at that, as you touched on. You know, the Antonio one sticks out, albeit it was a different scenario, but he still has the ability to read the game, look at the ball, and get his foot on the ball and make that block tackle. So, yeah, it's just that moment, I think, that stood out to me, that made me think, yeah, we've missed Murillo there, and Morato's defending has let us down. The midfield were doing a fairly decent job. Tricky Mickey says Sangare and Dominguez were putting in a shift and taking them off. And taking them off changed the outcome. Yeah, I mean, I kind of want to have a quick word on Sangare. So, in the last pod, I mean, there's been a few comments kind of flying around. I guess I will quickly address it. I would love nothing more than Ibrahim Sangare to play every game for Forest and be 10 out of 10 each week or thereabouts. And I think when I said after Palace, I don't want to see him in a Forest shirt again. What I probably should have said was, I'm not bothered if I see him in a Forest shirt again. I was very indifferent towards him. And that indifference comes from the last 2 years of Sangare. It doesn't come from a place of hate or anything else. So to anyone that is listening, watching, and wants to debate that with me, then they're welcome to come on to Talking Reds and we can have a conversation about that. But this is the place for opinions, and we're all fans with opinions, and we will say stuff about players because that's what we're here to do. If we don't talk about the players and point out deficiencies and point out when they're not great as well as when they're really good, then we might as well pack up shop and go home. Well, I already am home, but you know what I mean? So, yeah, on Sangare, I thought he was very good today. Without being unbelievably amazing, again, I'm just trying to kind of be balanced where I can, but I thought Dominguez put a shift in. I thought Sangare looked better than he was against Palace. And I think, Richard, you were talking about ground jewels that Sangare won against Palace, which was something like 1 out of 7. So
yeah, and he was 6 out of 8 today.
Yeah, not great. So, and today's 6 out of 8. So, you know, the data is there as well. So, look, I just wanted to kind of like touch on the Sangare thing without kind of like making too much of a big deal about it. All right. Like I said, people have different opinions, and we are allowed to have different opinions. Yours might be different to mine, and that's okay. So, what did you think of Sangare and Dominguez and Anderson in the midfield today, Andrew?
I'm with you. I thought it was probably one of Sangare's best games in a Forest shirt. I thought you still have that trait with Sangare where he sometimes takes 1 or 2 or 3 or even a dozen extra touches before he passes the ball, to an open player. But his range of passing seemed like it was absolutely on point today. Like the amount of opportunities that we created from him having the ball and playing in other players, I thought that was his best game. I think Dominguez, while his energy is unquestionable, he's not a winger. And I think in the system that he's being forced to play because of Hudson-Odoi's injury, I think you're seeing the limitations of him playing out wide. He comes inside quite a lot. He's more defensively minded sometimes. He'll play the ball backwards, whereas Hudson-Odoi may either play a forward-thinking pass or may even try to take on the opposition. So I think there's limitations there. Anderson is Anderson. I think he's probably in with a genuine shout for player of the season. I think today, again, did nothing necessarily to diminish that either. You know what you're going to get with Elliot Anderson. I just don't think that combination... And again, this is going back to the whole concept of the squad just being, wafer thin, and injuries really, really hitting us hard. I think there's an imbalance. Whatever 3 midfielders you put into that conversation, there's an imbalance there, because when we have those 2 natural wingers in Hudson-Odoi and Elanga, we have a shape. And the second you put somebody else into that isn't one of those 2, we look disjointed. Like I said, Sangare, I thought did well. I thought it was, like you said, Sangare is probably his best game. I mean, Anderson came off, it was that 92nd minute in the Awani situation. I thought he'd put a shift in at that point. I don't think him coming off hurt us for the same reasons as him should have stayed on, because Awani needed to come off. I think Dominguez's biggest complaint for me about the game was that one chance he had where he headed it, whereas he could have perhaps taken a touch or even just smashed it. I think it reminded me of the Ryan Yates goal at Bramall Lane, where the ball sat up and Yates had just absolutely thunderbasted it into the back of the net. That's what that situation needed. Whereas instead, it wasn't a bad header. It was still the wrong choice.
It was the wrong choice, wasn't it? Yeah,
exactly. So, I think you're seeing the limitation. I mean, it was the wrong players at the wrong time in certain respects. But I do think Sangare had a great game. I think he was probably, arguably, besides maybe Matt Sells, I think he was probably the best player we had on the pitch.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've got two games left, and it looks like maybe Sangare is the player that's going to play him. And Dan Scapes in the comments, hi Dan, I know he's been at the game today. He says he thinks Nuno got it wrong today. Ideal game for Sangare, but if you play an outright holding midfielder, then play a winger to offer a threat the other way. Had to take the game to them more. Yeah, I think we had to do that, and we weren't taking the game to them enough. First 5 minutes, or so, we came out the blocks and thought, right, Richard, here we go. Chris Woods should have done better, shouldn't he, really, with Alanga's cross, with that header went over the bar, Richard? I mean, is that rust again from Chris Wood, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's been the thing, is he doesn't look too physically lacking. I think he doesn't have quite the conversion sharpness that Andrew touched on just in general across, our team the past few weeks, but him in particular, I think he's now had 2 goals in the last 10 matches. So it's just not the kind of performance we're used to seeing from him. I mean, he had that. The obviously the goal that he scored was absolutely perfect. It's everything that you love about both players that were involved in that moment. But I would say that, he's just not quite switched on in the same way in and around the goal, in and around goals. So yeah, we could have used that first one. I think it sets a tone if that goes in, that frankly you get that one. And to me, it sets a complete trajectory change for the entirety of that match, because it falls right within the plan and the framework of what we like to do. Because as we saw today, it was one more moment where we just could not seemingly get a win coming from behind. It felt like it was there about the 65th minute, and then it just sort of dissipated quickly once Buonanotte scored. It had a completely different feel to it. But yeah, he gets that one. The Dominguez one you talked about. There was another one later where Chris Wood didn't have much time to react off of a shot from Dominguez that ricocheted back to him. And it was a pretty rapid ball coming at him. He didn't have much time to create a better angle for the header. But those are the kinds of moments in the past where Chris just seems to find the back of the net, unexpectedly, or not unexpectedly, but in a way that's probably not qualified as a big chance or a high XG scenario, So yeah, but it is what it is. I mean, you can't really lament too much.
I felt that in the first half, especially after they'd scored, that the nerves were kicking a little bit. We looked rattled, and I mean, Morgan Gibbs-White took a shot when he he definitely shouldn't have taken a shot, and it flew over and he turned around. It was almost like, why are you taking a shot from there? It wasn't going to go in. It was always going to go where it went. I mean, we get a free kick, Andrew, in a pretty dangerous area. I'm sat with Orlando and I say, Gibbs-White's going to take this. He's going to put it over, because I could just see it happening. And that's exactly what happened. And if I can predict that and we can predict that, then that isn't a good thing, is it? I mean, is it time for someone else to be kind of saying, look, listen, your record isn't very good from here. I mean, Anthony Alanga, for example, can whip a ball in. Elliot Anderson, maybe. I don't know. It just feels like we're just not very good when it comes to those dead ball situations.
I think we saw it earlier in the season, didn't we? Because if I recall correctly, in pre-season, wasn't Morgan Gibbs-White taking all the corners, and we were never getting them past the first man?
Well, that was all last season. That was all last season.
Yeah. Pretty much, yeah. So there was a change there where they tried Elliot Anderson for a bit, and they tried Anthony Alanga, and eventually they're the guys that stuck. So yeah, there's prize for it. I think it's a conversation that probably needs to be had, whether or not Gibbs-White, with his very specific situation and obviously all the transfer rumors, is and obviously he's wearing the captain's armband as well. So I guess depending on how Nuno's got that player hierarchy set on the pitch, he probably does have dibs on taking the free kicks. But yeah, I mean, I was exactly the same as you. As soon as that free kick was given and you saw Gibbs-White lining it up, you don't go into it thinking that we're going to score. And I think that's a problem. I was thinking on this, actually. I think maybe something to consider next season is maybe put Morello on direct free kicks. We've got this Stuart Pearce-esque left foot in our arsenal. Why not just see what happens? We've talked, all season about waiting for that Morello screamer to happen. Put him on free kick. Give him like the whole 40 yards to the goal. Anything within 40 yards that's direct, just give it Morello. See what happens. Because you guarantee that one of these days, one of those will scream into the top corner. But to your point,
we will have our wonder goal. God damn it. I hook up my crook. We got the equaliser, and I must admit, I felt such relief, because when we went 1-0 down, I had that thought that I'm sure we all think, oh my God, Forest are doing it. They're actually going to do it. They're going to lose to Leicester. So when we equalised, there was unadulterated relief. Again, Anthony Alanga with another assist, Richard.
Yeah, he's been incredible. I mean, he's been phenomenal unexpectedly. I mean, you saw elements of it. As we've said, the raw material has always been there. He's doing better about just focusing it on taking players on and not trying to do too much. And you saw that with that cross too later on, well, earlier on to Chris Wood's head. I mean, that was all him. That was a, sort of a classic Anthony Elanga moment. But yeah, he's been absolutely vital for us this season, considering Callum Hudson-Odoi hasn't had the surge in the second half that we saw last season. Morgan has trailed off. I know Dan had some great stats related to Morgan as it relates to goal contributions. But it seems like that, at least from a straight goal and assist standpoint, he was on 5 for virtually the entire second half of the season, with the exception of today, which was such a critical goal. Obviously, as you just pointed out, thank goodness he was there. Thank goodness he has the aerial capability for a guy who's 5'7", or maybe 5'8" at best. And so it was such an amazing performance from Morgan as well. I thought, just comprehensively, sans the free kick. I thought he played brilliantly today. But yeah, absolutely. Anthony Elanga
is marking you.
Well, there's that too. But I mean, Anthony has been, he's been absolutely essential this season, and he's going to be such an interesting player to see what happens in the offseason with him, because in part of me says, if you want to keep a Murillo, potentially you might have to sacrifice someone like him. But at the same time, he certainly availed himself well. He certainly kept his value up, and if not increased it, because he's only 23 years old. I mean, there's so much more that he can accomplish and continue to get better at, week over week. And yeah, if it were not performances from him in some critical games this season, I don't know where we'd be at this stage. We'd probably be further down than we even imagined. So yeah, absolutely one of the most valuable players on the club right now, for sure.
Morgan Gibbs-White did have a good game today. He took the game, he had moments where, like the free kick, like you're saying, but he did take the game by the balls, in his hands, and he shook it up. He was really trying, and I thought he was very, very good. And that's what I wanted to see from him when we went to Palace, and didn't get that. So I was glad that we saw it from him at home today. So going to take a quick break, because we are talking about the Forest draw at home to Leicester, but we need to talk about some cheese.
The Cheese Trader, based on Grape Lane in York, is a cheese lover's paradise. Home to some wonderful specialty cheeses, relishes and chutneys, and also with a fantastic street food menu. Try their loaded fries or posh cheese on toast. It'll be the best you've ever had. Owned by Forest fan Stu Freestone, the Cheese Trader proudly sponsors Talking Reds. Quote Talking Reds every time to get 10% off your order. The Cheese Trader and Talking Reds, the perfect cheesy mix.
Indeed, the perfect cheesy mix. You know what to do if you want to get some cheese from the Cheese Trader. Details in the bio. So, Forest on top. Start the second half. Andrew, it felt to me like the goal was coming. We were creating more chances. We were on the front foot. And yeah, that man Morgan Gibbs-White pulls out another fantastic ball. And that's what he can do, isn't it? We saw that wonderful ball for Callum Hudson-Odoi when he floated it across the pitch against Man City. And today, it was great to see something similar that ended up with a fantastic Chris Wood diving header. How important was that goal for Woody, though? We were talking a bit before about, a little bit of rust creeping in, but he's got to the 20 mark now. Quite an achievement for a Forest player.
Absolutely. And they said in the commentary on the US broadcast, he's the first Forest player since Stan Collymore to hit 20 goals in the top flight. And we all know, how good Stan Collymore was. Chris Wood's now in that same conversation. So it's an incredible achievement. It felt like a classic Chris Wood goal. And I think, I'd like to think that most people, the second that ball leaves Morgan Gibbs-White's foot and you can see Chris Wood's at the back post unmarked, it's going to be a goal. I just had this feeling in me. I was already out of my seat before the ball had even landed on his head, because between those two, there's this symbiosis between the two that you knew it was inevitable that it was going to happen. I thought he was going to go across the goalkeeper. The fact that he went near post and you see that angle from behind the goal, it was pitch perfect. In that bottom corner, the keeper stood absolutely no chance. The unfortunate, that should have been the chance for us to kick on and see the game out, but it didn't happen, as we obviously all know. So that in it, we talk about Gibbs-White. His contributions have been, unquestionable in terms of our successes this season, and that was, exactly the same. You mentioned the goal against Man City. That's what he has. That's what Man City, for all Gibbs-White's imperfections, and sometimes his attitude's questionable with him getting into this little huff in games and internally arguing with himself and other players. That's what he brings to the team. I wrote an article for a fanzine recently about Gibbs-White, and I called the article number 10 out of 10. And I think when Gibbs White's on his game, that's what he is. He's a 10 out of 10. He's the player in the team that takes you to that next level. You can see why Man City are sniffing around him for the amount of money that's being talked about. He's a game changer. He's the elite player in the squad on his day. And that moment, again, absolutely backs that up.
Whilst we're on Gibbs White and his importance to the team, I'll just stick with you for a moment, Andrew, on him. I think what I'm trying to get to is, if we sell him, what figure is going to be the right figure for him? And actually, do you feel that it might benefit us to sell him? And what I mean by that is, sometimes a player can almost be too much of the glue and be too much of the focal point, so that the team, everything goes through him. And so if he's missing for 3 or 4 games, it's difficult then to replace him in the team for a season. And so maybe we can bring in another 2 or 3 players and Forest find a new way of playing. Do you see that as a possible benefit, or am I just talking nonsense and just proposing something stupid and we must keep him at all costs?
I think you made a really good point there about finding another way to play. I think we're so entrenched in this whole non-possession football that relies on players like Gibbs White and Hudson-Odoi and Elanga for us to break and create chances and beat teams that, we're happy to sit in. But we don't seem to have an effective plan B consistently over the season. When teams like Everton, and we saw this against Palace as well, teams are happy to let us have the ball, we're not good at breaking teams down. And I think that's where Gibbs White sometimes struggles. Gibbs White's great when you're playing with that one style of football that Nuno's had such, an effective way of having us play. I'm in that camp where, of course, it'd be sad to see Gibbs White go. He's one of those generational talents, and you want to see him develop and grow and become an England international, potentially future England captain, wearing the Forest shirt, at the same time. But yeah, I think the way the season's been and how much perspective we've had on, the goods and the bads, I think there'd be a conversation that we wouldn't necessarily, of course, we'd be disappointed, but I think we'd have a sense of perspective if Gibbs White were to go. And I think that whole concept of, the big fish, small pond, I think he could go one of 2 ways. He could go to Man City and he could be, a small fish in a very big pond. But he could also it could absolutely fail for him as well. I think the lure of Pep coaching him, but also the pressure that accompanies that, I'm not sure that it's quite right for him yet. So it may be an opportunist time where the value is at its peak for us to get the most money out of him. And that does give us options to restructure and create a squad that gives us that plan B, an effective plan B. So, of course, it'd be disappointed to see him go. But I think if they were to offer us maybe 70 million and McAtee, I'd probably take it.
Yeah, listen, I think if we throw McAtee into the mix, then I think that makes it, it sweetens it by a long way. But I think, Richard, what I'm trying to say is, I can't even get my words out today. I'm a mumble mouth sod tonight. There are good players out there, not necessarily better players than Morgan Gibbs White, because I love Morgan Gibbs White. I think he's a brilliant player, but there are other good players out there. And so if we pin everything on one player as fans and say, oh, if we lost him, we're never going to replace him. Same with Murillo. I mean, he's a wonderful, wonderful player. I just enjoy watching him play. But I'm at peace and I'm reconciled with myself that one or both of them are going to get sold this year or next year or at different times, because we have to sell. That hasn't changed. In the Premier League, you have to balance the books. And we've obviously been or had a points deduction in the past because of not being able to balance the books properly. And we've had to make sales and so on. Not getting Champions League football means that our target market changes as well, doesn't it? So who we might bring in now changes, or who we might not bring in now changes. So it's so many different things to weigh up. But when it comes to Gibbs White, I know that obviously he's your main man, isn't he? So you were saying last time round that you're perhaps a bit more at peace with him going. Is that still the case?
Yeah, I think it's just I hate to use this phrase because it gets used a lot, but the head over heart scenario. I mean, I forgive the analogy here, but when I was, I've been Detroit Lions fan my whole life, which has been a very sad and lonely existence. Let me tell you, Andrew's nodding his head and he knows, but they had one of the greatest American football players of all time in Barry Sanders. And even when he had just gotten a 2,000-yard season, which in American football terms is a massive deal, right? It's not many that do it. I was I had to realize for us to progress, to get the kind of players we need and the draft capital we needed to give him up, because it was his time. He had put in his time with Detroit, and he was ready to move on potentially to a more winning team, or a team that he had an opportunity to potentially win a Super Bowl with. It's not exactly the same concept, but I think it's similar in the sense that we just know we can't sit here and talk about being the Brighton model or being the Villa model or doing any of those kinds of things if we're not. And I don't even know if Villa model is really the right one at this stage, given they're in trouble. But the Brighton model, I'm sure they would love to have Caicedo on their team right now. But the reality is they needed to do things like that in order to progress. And that's not a joyous event, especially with a player who I hold so dear to my heart. As I've said many, many times, he's the most captivating player that I've ever watched in a Forest shirt since Stuart Pearce. And he is one of those guys that people tend to gravitate towards, just his personality. And he does have that leadership. Yeah, he has those grumpy moments, as Andrew alluded to earlier, where he gets a little edgy. But in reality, so is Stuart Pearce. He was an edgy guy at times as well. So it would be very devastating to see him. But as Dan pointed out, I think it would be great for him, because I think there's just something there to unlock. I think Nuno's taken him as far as he can get him, it feels like, and maybe it's time for him to move on, because it benefits both sides. I'm sure if you asked him right now, he'd say, I don't want to leave. I love being here. I love playing with these guys. I love playing under Nuno. I love the city, right? I mean, he'll now have 2 children born in that city. So it's just going to be hard to watch that happen. But at the same time, the residual benefit will be that he's put the time in, he's done what he needed to do, he'll move on, he'll provide the benefits to the club financially. And so the logistics now become, how do we rebuild the squad and fill all these holes that we're going to have? And it will change depending on what happens, as you said, with Murillo, because that creates a whole nother challenge as well. Because now don't we not have a captain, sort of element in the attack? We're now losing one of the key parts of our defense as well. So hopefully that doesn't happen. It'll be one or the other. But in reality, I could see why it's a benefit. And I hate thinking about it too much, because then I get really devastated. But at the same time, I recognize for the club's trajectory, it has to occur.
So back to the game, to wrap up a few things that we don't want to talk about. The substitution for Taiwo Awoniyi. So he rattled that post, right? I mean, one thing I would say is this silly rule where the linesman or referee's assistant, I should say, lets it go to play it out, has ended up in Taiwo getting injured, because he was clearly offside. And it's in those circumstances that you want the referee's assistant to put up her flag and say, yeah, he's offside, and then it stops the play. And we were all waiting for it just to blow up. It was clear as anything that he was way off. And of course, they've carried on. Taiwo's clattered into the post. And this is where the debacle starts. And this is where I think someone's head is going to roll. Now, we also know as well, for those of you that haven't seen it, I know that everyone has. So there was 2 physios with Taiwo. Nuno wanted to make a substitution. He wanted to bring Elliot Anderson off. He wanted to bring Jota Silva on. And because it looked like Awoniyi might not be able to carry on, there was a bit of a delay. And then it looked like the word came from the physios that Taiwo is fine. He's going to come back on again. So in that moment, the substitution was made with Anderson departing and Jota Silva coming on. And that was our final window. We couldn't make any more subs after that. We had 2 more remaining, but no windows. But then, of course, Taiwo just did not look like he was going to be able to continue. So there's been a breakdown in communication. And at the end of the match, Mr. Marinakis comes onto the pitch. And we all saw the images of what looked like an argument between him and Nuno. Now, there have been some subsequent things said. Nuno said that it was a misunderstanding between the coaching and medical department. We were both frustrated. He's talking about Mr. Marinakis and himself. It is because of the owner's passion that we are growing as a club. He pushes us. He wants us to be better. He also says if it was the other way around, maybe 1 month ago, he'd say, okay, we have the job done. That's normal. His desire and passion is to be a big club. And honestly, as a club, we owe a lot to the Marinakis family. Mr. Marinakis himself has issued a statement in the last sort of 30 minutes or so, I think it was. He says, today is a day for celebration because after 30 years, Nottingham Forest is now guaranteed to be competing on the European stage once again. A promise I made to our supporters when we achieved promotion. With 2 more games to go in the Premier League, we must keep believing and keep dreaming right to the final kick in the final game. We are extremely proud and close to Nuno and the team, and we must all celebrate the historic achievements of this season. Everybody, coaching staff, players, supporters, including myself, we were frustrated around the injury of Taiwo and the medical staff's misjudgment on Taiwo's ability to continue the game. This is natural. This is a demonstration of the passion we feel for our club. Let's all be grateful, passionate, and keep on dreaming. So there's a lot to unpack from that, I think. The thing that I hadn't even seen that statement. Richard's put that up whilst I was talking. I haven't even seen that. And I'd said to these guys off camera that I think someone's head is going to roll, because those 2 physios, it was their job to get the call. I'm not calling for anyone's head, by the way. I don't want anyone to lose their job. I really don't. I hope that's not the case. I hope it all gets sorted out and that's fine. I'm not calling for that before I get even more pelters coming my way. But knowing Mr. Marinakis, he may well want to pull the trigger on someone. He might be that pissed off, Richard, that the physios are the ones in the firing line. It was a bit of a debacle, wasn't it? I mean, it just summed up the day, really, I thought.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Just key moments that didn't quite unfold as you would expect or you would hope that they would. And yeah, I like what Paul said here too about the confrontation afterwards. He said, I don't read too much into the confrontation. Obvious cock up with a sub that everyone could see. Evangelos Marinakis' frustration comes from the right place, but he should have waited. I don't disagree with that. But yeah, I mean, given the gravity of the circumstances, and you're right, that rule is ridiculous. I mean, Prutton, I think, said it on the broadcast as well. It was just like, why wait? Why allow that to occur? Because you're going to, I mean, that could have been a lot worse. Who knows what the actual diagnosis is on Taiwo? Hopefully he doesn't have a cracked rib or anything of the like. But yeah, it was kind of it sent the match into a kind of a weird space and flow. And yeah, I didn't quite grasp it, but you're right. I mean, Evangelos Marinakis is not afraid to make decisions and to do it in a way that feels pretty punitive, I'm sure, but it could be the case. I mean, you can't put players at risk like that. You can't create turmoil within the flow of the game. I mean, it's just, yeah, it was in a good situation comprehensively. But, as far as like what happened afterwards when he went and talked to Nuno, I mean, that's him, right? He's gonna get out on the pitch. He's gonna do what he does, and I don't disagree with what Paul said. It doesn't come from a place of malice per se. It comes from a place of passion, and I'm sure it was I think there was a moment where they cut to him right after he had scored the second goal, and he looked absolutely infuriated. Yeah. Well, he's just like shocked as all of us were, I'm sure.
I mean, yeah. Look, it's what he does. He's technically not the owner as well. Someone else I saw said technically he should have been on the pitch.
Maguire.
Technically, he's not the owner. But yeah, I mean, Andrew, what did you make of the incident with Taiwo? I mean, surely someone's got to be saying, look, he's not coming back on again, end of story, or delay the substitution. Why take Elliot Anderson off if you're not sure?
I think with the greatest of respect to Taiwo Awoniyi as well, if it's any other player, then maybe there's an outside chance that they're okay. But with Taiwo, who, on a good day is made out of glass. I mean, I heard him hit the post with his body all the way here in Wisconsin. It was a pretty severe impact. I don't think anyone in the ground probably thought that he was going to be able to get up and play. And he was down for maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes before he even got up. Yeah, it's just frustrating. Same, and everything you said before, I completely echo. I think you could delay a few minutes. I think the challenge with delaying it is it's so close to the end of the game. I think it was like 89 minutes when the incident actually occurred, and obviously they're trying to get this rapid fire substitution on. I think it does just come down to the medical team. I think they need to assess not just correctly, but it has to be quick as well. And they got it wrong on both counts. They took too long to make the wrong decision. And by the point when it had taken that long, you need to get players on the pitch. Could they have waited? I mean, hindsight's 2020, and maybe they could have delayed for another 30 seconds. But who's to say that they still wouldn't have put Taiwo back on anyway? If the medical staff have kind of made that diagnosis, then that's their diagnosis. Just frustration all around. I will say this. I do think if you look back at the video, I think Nuno handled that situation with Marinakis particularly well. I mean, you could see there was frustration, but I think just the way he kind of said, yeah, I get it. We'll talk afterwards. It's fine. I mean, again, credit to Nuno for how well he kind of, de-intensified the situation very, very quickly.
Yeah, he's good. He's calm. He de-escalated it, didn't he? Very well.
De-escalated,
And of course, I was getting notifications on my phone. I saw it on Talk Sports, Sky Sports. Gary Neville was weighed in on X as usual and should just keep his mouth shut. Because everyone wants to make a big song and dance about something. When actually, you know what? Everyone can just calm down a little bit, okay? Paul's saying it was another example of muddled thinking and miscommunication that's plagued us for the last few weeks. Long season, tired minds, lessons to learn for next season. That's true. But one thing we should talk about, Richard, as well. I mean, just kind of going back slightly. When we lost the second goal, when they scored and got it to 2-2, it was at that point that it looked like possibly there's only going to be one winner, and that was Leicester. But Forest has stopped playing almost when we went 2-1 up. We've gone 2-1 up, and we should have been going for the third goal. And they brought on Brennanotte, and now we were talking about him as being quite a tidy little player. Is he the kind of player that maybe Forest should be going after in the summer?
Yeah, he fits the profile from an age standpoint. He's got talent. I mean, he's long been, I think, throughout the season, he's been one of their most dynamic players. So, yeah, I mean, I could absolutely see that being the case. He's difficult to deal with, he doesn't have the physicality clearly, but he's on the ball. He's so good. He's so creative. He's quick. He is the kind of player that creates havoc for us. And so, yeah, I could definitely see that being a player that they might be interested in potentially. I don't know what he's worth in terms of the transfer market and so forth, but for sure, yeah, he came on. He was the one guy I think that I want to say that Raf isolated as well within the preview where he talked about, he had been in concussion protocol, so he wasn't playing the last match. I think they played West Ham potentially before, right, the game before, and he didn't play. And then he was on the bench for this match because I know Van Nistelrooy said he was going to be available, and I was just like, I just don't want to see him, because he's such a difficult player to deal with coming on late in the matches, as we've all pointed out, just the fatigue that our team is feeling at this stage in the season. And then you bring him on. He did. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's the dynamism that he possesses. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the kind of player you want, right? You want that kind of player who does create, I don't know if fear is the right word, but he makes you pay attention to where he is, and he's positionally versatile as well, which is something we long covet, right? Being able to see players who can play the wing, they can play in the midfield area. He can be an attacking midfielder like Morgan Gibbs-White. So why not? I mean, that to me, it fits the profile of what we're looking for, especially if we're going to be trying to rebuild the squad. I mean, it's all great to say we're going to go after, different players with a much higher price point and bigger profile, but in reality, it just may not fit what we're trying to accomplish. You may be able to get a player like that, like someone like a Delap or someone of that nature that has a little bit more profile now, but it's these other players like him that you find that are sort of there to be picked off from these teams that are getting relegated, and they're going to be at a reasonable cost and potentially provide you with something that, you're definitely going to need moving forward, because our hope is that we do take that next step, right? Whether Champions League, what have you.
There's an interesting conversation to be had about the difference between the type of players and the level of rebuild that we'd need to do for the Champions League versus the Europa. And I think if we were to get to the Champions League, you see this huge gap in terms of the depth and the quality of players that we currently have. And with the greatest of respect, and it's been a phenomenal season, but I think the players that we have currently in the squad, there's maybe 4 or 5 that you would say are like Champions League ready. I think if we get to the Champions League, you're almost going to have to completely break that squad down and rebuild it. Now, I remember the playoff season and how we fell in love with that squad of players, and then we had to say goodbye to most of them because they were on loan. There's every chance if we made Champions League that we'd have that same scenario again, versus if we go to Europa, you're adding on, you're not completely rebuilding. So you get to keep the majority of the nucleus of that squad that we've all fallen in love with and give them European football and, give them that benefit of European football. So there's something to be said for that. I think it's that, again, maybe it's just those rose-tinted, dark cloud, silver lining piece. But I think if we did make Champions League, you could probably end up saying goodbye to a lot of these players because they're just not good enough. And Marinakis, you said earlier, he's not afraid, to make those tough decisions. Those fringe players, the Nico Dominguez's, maybe the Sangaris, those kind of players, maybe some of the like a Murato, those kind of, they wouldn't survive. Jota Silva's, Roman Sosa's, they would not make the grade next season. We'd have to say goodbye to half the squad. Not necessarily a bad thing because you're going to find new players to fall in love with, but there's something to be said that we could keep building on the squad that we have if all we end up with is Europa.
You bring me on to the last bit that I wanted to talk about, which was the silver lining. as much as we want Champions League football, we've been in the top 3 for so long, and it's been an amazing season. We've been challenging, and everyone's been talking about Forest. Oh my God, they're going to do it. And it looks like we're now not going to do it. But actually, is that going to be probably the best thing for us? Was the Champions League probably just a step too far and a step too early? Because we got promoted out of the Championship out of nowhere. And as you've just touched on, Andrew, we had to completely overhaul the squad in that first season, in that first transfer window. And everyone laughed at us for the amount of players we brought in. But it was a necessity. And you're right, it would be a necessity to go into the Champions League. We would need to bring in some significant talent. I mean, some significant talent. Just to, I wouldn't want to go into a Champions League competition and just get pumped and get embarrassed. It's not what I want. I want us to build. So is Europa, it might even be conference, you know, it's not what I want. But come on, any Champions League football is going to, I beg your pardon, any European football is going to be absolutely fantastic for us. So, Richard, is it better for us, really, that we actually do just make Europa after all, in the long run?
Yeah. I'm trying to find the right, balance between not seeming like I'm just capitulating to what, we likely are going to get now, and make it seem like, oh, it's okay, guys, because everything's all right now. Now we're still getting, but in reality, that's the truth. I mean, that's the one fact we know. We're in European, league play next year, and so it's going to be a great, competition next season. So, yeah, I would say so. I mean, the more you start to let the dust settle a little bit, you get caught up in all the rumors and all the things that are flying around, X and other places, and it's just a clickbait sort of haven. But in reality, being able to let our recruiting team do what they do well, which is to find players that you don't expect to be, the quality that we end up having them become, which is like a Murillo kind of model, right? Which, I mean, that's a little bit of an exception, but in reality, that's what you want to kind of do, is you want to keep building that depth, because ultimately that's what's going to get you prepared, as Andrew just touched on. And I keep using this word, and I think you've used this word, Greg, and others have used this word, but it feels like more of an organic next step versus trying to say, okay, if we get to Champions League, now we got to force our way into a 50-60 million pound player, where we use up a good portion of what we probably have available to build the squad on maybe a single player. And, it would be great to have Mateus Cunha on our team, from a talent standpoint, from a production standpoint. But in reality, one, he doesn't fit the profile in terms of culture, I don't think. But at the same time, he's also way too expensive. And you just give up far too much everywhere else, as Andrew touched on, being a thin squad already, not having the depth, having the differential we have from our first team to our second team. And we need to be able to close that gap, and we need to keep building with talent, which is why I know Raf and I have gone back and forth on a multitude of players. Mm-hmm. Dan's brought in players that he likes. Jamie's thrown in players that he likes. But a lot of them are younger players that are talented, but yet haven't gotten there yet, that we can turn around in a few years, just like we're doing with Morgan, just like we're doing with Murillo potentially, versus trying to throw something in there. I know how ambitious our owner is, but spending 65-70 million pounds on Gyökeres, to me, is not good business. It's just going to put you backwards, not help advance you. Even though he's a great player, what's the rest of the squad going to look like? Because you can't sustain it if you throw that kind of money at one player. So I agree with you 100%. I think it is the right thing in the end, even if it feels disappointing right now.
And listen, there's always another year. Look at, as we touched on, West Ham won the conference. Look at Aston Villa, went quite far in the conference season, and they built on that. And the following season, they qualified for Champions League, and they had a great campaign in the Champions League. And they are the dark horses that have come up and steamrolled and quite possibly make the top 5 now out of nowhere. And so look at the Europa League. The 2 finalists are currently sitting 16th and 17th in the Premier League. I mean, they have just completely blown their season away. They have got their eggs united in Spurs all on that final. So, there's another season to be had. It's not the end of the road. Forest are in the Premier League for a 4th season, which at the start of this year was what I would have thought. I just want another year in the Premier League. And anything else that we get on top of that is going to be an absolute bonus. And we had an FA Cup semi-final. It's been an absolute ride. So look, as much as I was on the floor at the end of that game, I'm now feeling really happy and optimistic. And I think every Forest fan should be. We should be feeling really proud, really, really proud. We've got back into Europe. So get your passports ready, guys, because, it's happening next season. that takes us to the end. Andrew Cove in Wisconsin, thank you so much for being with us. Give us your closing thoughts before we let you go, buddy.
I think it's perspective and pride. I think we've talked about it a lot all over the season, and Nuno's been really good at setting expectations in his press conferences and all of the discourse that he's provided. I think what you said's absolutely perfect. It's been how long? 30 odd years since we've been in Europe. This team, we can be so proud of where we are as a club. 3.5 years ago, we were at the bottom of the championship. I know it's cliche to keep going back to that as a point in time, but that's the reality of it. We have come so far in such a short space of time that whatever we were able to achieve this season, if it was higher than 12, it exceeded 90% of our fan base's expectations, and here we are sitting at worst in 7th by the end of the season. So I'm just incredibly proud. I think as a club, as a fan base, as a set of players and staff, just everyone at that club should be incredibly proud of what we've achieved this season.
Indeed. Andrew, thanks so much for being with us. It's great to have you on as usual. And my compadre, Richard Spray, happy Mother's Day to your fantastic wife over there, because it's Mother's Day in America. And also happy Mother's Day to your beautiful wife, Andrew, as well, over in Wisconsin. So I hope all the mothers across the pond have enjoyed their day and I've been spoiled by their husbands and children, as they should be. And you've still got plenty of time left in your days to do just that. So enjoy the rest of it. Richard, any closing thoughts?
Bless my brother who messaged me, and he didn't have to, because as many may know, my brother Matt is a Manchester United fan and a rabid Manchester United fan. And all he could send me a message about was, look, pick your head up, because you could be me right now. And I hate to use Manchester United as a, just a way of making ourselves feel better. But look, we're not a hot mess of a club. We are a prideful, wonderful club with a storied history, with so much joy that we've, and when you hear that city ground electric and alive and just cheering the team on, it doesn't matter what league you're in. It doesn't matter what players on the pitch. It's just always brings goosebumps to me, and it makes me feel so proud, as Andrew brought up, that concept of pride, to be a part of this sort of Forest fan base and to be a part of this sort of family and this community, right, Greg, that we are so connected to. And so, yeah, I mean, I can't be anything but more grateful, because we are a hell of a lot closer to what we were under Brian Clough than Manchester United is to Alex Ferguson. So be grateful for that, right? Sorry, Manchester United fans, but, we're going to use you to make ourselves feel a little bit better today.
Going to leave it there. Thank you ever so much to everyone who has taken part in the comments as well. Really appreciate quite a few people watching. If you haven't already, please do hit like and subscribe. It really helps us no end. If you can just take the moment to hop over, hit like, subscribe, and join the crowd, and maybe you won't miss future episodes as well. We'll be back with a preview for West Ham at some point in the week. But in the meantime, Tricky Trees, feel happy. Don't worry. It's all good. We're going to be in Europe next season. See you soon.
Come join Greg and Richard right here on top.